I am Vinnie Tortorich. Folks, your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. You may be soft and succulent at the beginning of this process, but hang in there. Before long, you will be lean and mean, guaranteed. This guy has been on the show. Oh, God. It doesn't matter how many times he's been on the show. It's been several, but here's the deal. Whenever I do the Friday show and I have the big timers on the show, the big names, I'm not going to mention any here. Usually at the end of the show, they will say something to me like, hey, man, you think you could blow a call into your buddy, Dr. Drew, get me on his show? You think maybe you can get me on Adam Carolla's show? You know, every one of them. And I get it. They're trying to get their brand out there to push their book or whatever. Hey, you know Mike Rowe, don't you? I'm sure I do. You think you can get me on Mike Rowe's show? Yeah. There's only one man. And all of that time, by the way, Dave, don't ask me to get you on Mike Rowe's show. I don't have any. There's only one man who I've actually picked the phone up to and called Adam and Drew and said, you got to have this guy on. And if I remember right, the first time they wanted me to come in with you, right? And by the way, yeah. we're talking about Dave Feldman here. Yeah, there he is. So you see, we started this conversation off the air, so you guys have to just come in. Dave, they made us go in together the first time, right?
Yeah, this was on Dr. Drew.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you did it again after that, right? Didn't you go in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't sure exactly how the chemistry with Dr. Drew and I would go. And I recommend listening to that podcast, because if you have that in mind when you start listening, Dr. Drew and I just like end up becoming completely just constantly back and forth biochem discussion.
If you want to see how nerds never get laid in college, listen to these two guys. I felt like I was watching Maria Sharapova and Serena Williams back in, 2006, playing each other. I just went in and said, hey, I'm Vinny. I brought Dave in. And it was like watching a tennis match. My head was just going back and forth, back and forth. And you guys just nerded out. That's all I remembered from that podcast.
It was a blast.
Yeah.
It was so much fun.
Yeah. And I know Drew really liked you. And, but yeah, look, I won't do that for many people at all. But you, no problem. You, Dave, you figured out a lot of things. And I think it was the first time, and tell me, I might be saying this and I might be way wrong. Stop me and tell me I'm an idiot for saying it. But the first time I heard the term, I'd never heard this term before, citizen scientist. It was attributed to you. And I was like, well, what's this fresh holy hell, citizen scientist? What are we talking about? And they said, well, you know, your buddy, Dave Feldman, he's a citizen scientist. And I said, I don't know about that, but I guess you would be the definition of a citizen scientist, right, Dave? Or am I getting that wrong?
No, I think you're getting it right. You know, it was an effort to, I guess you could say, qualify myself in a, I guess you could say, unqualifying way. I am of course an engineer throughout my life, but in trepidatiously stepping into science, I emphasize that I'm not a formally trained scientist.
Right.
And there's pros and cons to that.
Okay. Let's start with a couple of the cons.
Well, sure, that's easy, which is people immediately, depending on where they're coming from, will say, oh, well, how can you talk about this? You're yourself not a trained fill in the blank scientist, right? So the area of interest to me is lipids with things like cholesterol. And so understandably, by the way, somebody might say, well, you're an engineer. You're not a lipidologist. How could you know anything about lipids? And I find what's helpful is to just be very upfront, for there not to be any pretense. I know you respect that, Vinny.
Yeah.
When there's no pretense, when you're like, yeah, correct. Everything I've learned in the last 10 years. It's not been through formal training. It's been through my experiments, many of which I've shared with you on this show. Yes, I am a citizen scientist. And what that means is virtually all of my knowledge is self-directed, and now I can say has come up quite a bit with interacting with existing lipidologists and existing doctors and PhDs and so forth. But I've embraced it to the degree that, I now have a public charity called the Citizen Science Foundation.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we're a little different because I've asked doctors on this Friday show because, we ask every doctor, and we do it in my documentaries and everywhere else, where we sit there and we'll go, I'll say to a doctor, well, you learned the same thing all these other doctors learned in school. Where did you get an inkling that you should look in a different direction? And they'll literally say, from guys like you, right? We are following, we're looking at what you guys are doing, and we're going, well, it's an N1 experiment, but N1 times 10,000 people. Can you really call that an N1 experiment anymore? These people came onto, people like me came on the internet, started saying, eat this way, you're going to lose weight and get healthier. And some of these doctors weren't so up their own ass to where they went, we can't deny that these people are in better shape and they're coming off of drugs. Should we not look into this? But then people look at a guy like me and they'll go, well, Vinny's a damn gym rat. Yeah, I have a degree in exercise physiology and a degree in nutrition, but I don't have a PhD, right? And so I can't put the fake doctor in front of my name. As a matter of fact, is Nina, and by the way, Nina is a close friend. Is Nina any smarter today now that she's Dr. Taisho's? She became a doctor, she got a PhD 5 minutes ago. I would argue that Nina was just as smart right before they gave her that PhD label, but everyone said, oh, she's just a writer. She doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. She's not a PhD. Well, fuck you, because guess who's a PhD now? One Miss Nina Taisho's. But I would argue Nina had to go learn things that she doesn't agree with and put things down on paper that she probably doesn't. And of course, when you write your thesis, you're writing what you want to write about. But she's putting stuff down on paper or listening to things in these courses where she probably doesn't agree with it, right? Because she's been in this world for 15, 20 years now. But now you can't yell at her and go, oh, she's not a PhD. Well, now she is. Would you agree, Dave? What do you say on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you could say the big fat surprise was a thesis. It certainly has a gargantuan number of words. It has a number of studies that it links to. And I myself, I'm a big fan of not just peer review, but public review. And so if you're putting out a book that's sourced, then you're putting it to the public to review and to critique and so forth. And I think that that's a very cathartic experience. I myself, I get this advice a lot, that I could also potentially pursue a PhD from published works, which is where a PhD comes from. And it's kind of an after the effect thing. Maybe you didn't get formal training, but if you're published, and I myself am now published on, I think, 10, 11 papers, including, of course, spearheading this study we'll probably chat about here in a moment. That's plenty when you throw in additionally doing the thesis work itself. But regardless, getting to the larger point that you're making on the formal versus citizen scientist, having the letters after your name is meaningful to some people. And that is one of the cons of being a citizen scientist, in that, in the case of like Nina Teicholz, some people will take her more seriously now that she has a PhD, because the letters matter for some people. Even though, as you just mentioned, the wealth of her knowledge, I'm sure she's learned a lot since she got her PhD, but the wealth of her knowledge, over 99%, has been pre-PhD.
Right.
Would it be comparable to somebody else who has a PhD in nutrition? I mean, I think many people would argue that.
Well, look, I mean, you could come out of college 3 years after an undergrad degree and have a PhD, right? And I don't think you have anywhere near at that point the experience and the knowledge of a Nina Teicholz, right? We might want to name this podcast, "Why is Nina Teicholz so great and we're not?" But I marvel at and look, I'm talking about a close friend, someone who I love dearly. But she, she's done it, right? She did not have a horse in the race. As a matter of fact, the horse, folks, if you don't know who Nina is, and if you've never read Big Fat Surprise, she went out to explain why the vegan and vegetarian diet was a superior diet. That was the task. She was working for a magazine or a newspaper, I cannot remember. And she was a vegetarian at the time. I think she wasn't a vegan. And they gave her the story to go, hey, go explain for this, kind of tree hugging magazine or whatever in the hell it was, why veganism or vegetarianism is the best way to eat. And when she started uncovering things, because Nina will read through studies, her father was an actual scientist, right? So she understood how to read abstracts and how to read, findings and everything else. The further she kept going down the rabbit hole, the more she saw that the papers that were used to explain why fat and cholesterol were bad for you were actually telling the opposite story. And then she abandoned the article, and that was the beginning of her writing Big Fat Surprise. And I think she worked on it for 10 years before the book actually came. I think she started like in 2002 or something like that. And the book came out in like 2012, 13. Her book came out right after mine at some point, I think. And it was the book that toppled my book. I think that's the way it goes. So maybe I toppled her. I can't remember. We were both selling a shit ton of books, which is good for both of us. But that's not what we were trying to do. We were trying to put, it's like, look, neither of us have a horse in this race. I do not make a living off of telling people to eat low carb, high fat foods, right? There's no money to be made in that. If there was money to be made in that, somehow Kellogg's would figure it out and they would go sell high fat foods, right? But they can sell crap that's shelf stable all day long. So they'll explain to you how that's better. But that's where we are with things. And Dave, I think you fall into that same category where you didn't really have a horse in the race. You were trying to figure out why a lean guy had high cholesterol or something very near that. And then you started learning about lean masked hyperresponders. Or am I getting that all wrong?
No, you're getting that right. I mean, I literally coined the term. I was picking up a hyperresponder from what little I could find at the time that my cholesterol went up, going on a low carb, high fat diet. And I became obsessed with trying to figure out exactly how this happened. How could cholesterol get high, particularly when I was lean and my two other family members that started at the same time did not see their cholesterol go up nearly as high as mine did. And that became an obsession. I already kind of went through this with you before on sort of the play-by-play, but eventually, definitely one of the most key moments for me in my life, and which gets covered in this documentary we'll be chatting about in a moment, was codifying that term and the phenotype overall, that to identify people going on a low carb, high fat diet who see not only their LDL go up, but also who see their HDL cholesterol, the so-called good cholesterol, go up, and triglycerides, a measure of fat in the blood, go down. Those three together tended to be more prominent and more extreme the leaner and more metabolically healthy you were while being on a low carb diet. And so I named it at that time lean mass hyperresponder. And lo and behold, here we are. What is it? That was in 2017. So 18 years later, it's now.
No, in 2017, that's not 18 years.
Yeah, eight years later.
Yeah.
So here we are 8 years later, and it's now not only in these published papers that I'm chatting about, it's in this film, but it's also at the center of this study. And frankly, I think we're really onto something. We may be on to a real paradigm shift here. Obviously I don't want to get ahead of myself, but so far the data is showing a lot of things that were not expected by conventional medicine. So I think it's pretty exciting.
Okay. Cholesterol is one of the biggest things. I almost feel like I can have you on once every Friday, right?
Right.
I know that doesn't make sense to say once every Friday, but I meant it to come out that way. I had Zoe. I get Zoe Harcombe on as often as I possibly. I want Zoe to be my Friday co-host. And
Mm,
that's how much the woman is. You want to talk about an actual scientist, an actual doctor that, what is she, a Rhodes Scholar and this and top of her class? This woman knows her stuff. She said something on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. She goes, looking at cholesterol and trying to figure out if it has anything to do with heart disease means nothing. She goes, I never even get mine checked anymore. And a lot of people brought that up to me in the phone consults that I do. It's like, wow, she really put me at ease because my doctor wants me to go on a statin, and I'll say to him, listen, I just tell me what your total cholesterol is. And they'll say somewhere between 180 and 220, right? Like they all fall in that 180 to 220 range.
mhm.
And they'll say, my doctor tells me my LDL and HDL, the ratio is perfect and all this kind of stuff, but he wants me on a statin. And I was like, oh, really? That ratio? Did he do a particle test? No, what are you talking about? No particle test? Did you ask your doctor about your triglycerides? No, what's that? I don't really know what that is. Like, wait a minute. Your doctor did not do a small dense particle test. He doesn't know about your ApoA, your ApoB, any of it. He just checked high and low and told you something about a ratio that he doesn't even understand, right? He didn't compare to your triglycerides, yet he wanted to put you on a drug. And that's when I always say, well, maybe he should just put a cast on your right leg. Well, my right leg is not broken. Doesn't matter. Let's put a cast on it. You may break it. That's literally what these doctors are saying. Am I wrong, Dave?
I'll steel man them to some degree. I
Okay.
think that I think that what I think that what here let's put this on the table.
Okay.
Are there a number of doctors who would say an LDL of say above 100 is too high? Yes. And many of them will want to take action to lower it. In fact, many will feel that just age by itself is enough of a reason. If you get past a certain age, you should just be on a statin anyway. And I think the vast majority of them are well-meaning. They really do feel it's ultimately going to be preventative towards heart disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what what our study is illuminating is that something you and I know all too well. Metabolic health, even if you're fully in belief of the lipid hypothesis, which is to say that LDL cholesterol is driving atherosclerosis, or for that matter, ApoB containing lipoproteins are driving atherosclerosis. They're making atherosclerosis happen, atherosclerosis being the plaque in the arteries. That metabolic health is an order of magnitude more relevant.
Explain. I pretend I'm in third grade.
Okay.
Explain to a third grader metabolic health. What does that mean,
Yes.
to you, Dave?
So we hear the term metabolism a lot. You want to have a good metabolism. Here's my third grade explanation. Metabolism is this balancing act your body is doing. And it's doing it with lots of things, but the thing you're most concerned about is fuel. It needs to successfully put fuel inside of it and then successfully pull it back out. And when you have a poor metabolism, it's bad at balancing, bad at managing those fuel sources. And a great way you can tell that you've got signs of a bad metabolism is a lot of the fuel is backing up into your bloodstream. So when you hear somebody's got high levels of glucose, for example, that's a fuel. Glucose is a fuel. If you have high levels of triglycerides is a fuel. Guess what? You likely have both of them high or both of them low. But if you have low levels of glucose and triglycerides, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're running out of fuel. It likely means that your body is good in most cases at putting that fuel away and pulling it back out again. That's why athletes will likely tend to have low levels of glucose and low levels of triglycerides because just about as fast as they're pulling it out, they're burning it and using it, or they're putting it back away again, right?
Yeah.
So if you're bad at managing fuel in your body, then you'll likely get bad at that as one of the first and earliest signs that things are going wrong. And then probably gaining weight, especially body fat, will follow. And then further dysregulation, you have what's known as insulin resistance. That's where insulin, the hormone that signals that moving fuel around, your body's tissues start becoming resistant to working with it. That's kind of a high level view. And what's important, Vinny, is it should go without saying that people with this insulin resistance, people who have a poor metabolism, we are not surprised to find that there's a strong association between that poor metabolism and cardiovascular disease, having a huge risk for having a heart attack. I literally posted a tweet earlier today where I said, does anyone have any studies on people with severe type 2 diabetes and low LDL or ApoB who are at a low risk for cardiovascular disease? Now, you want to know what answers I've gotten that show that they're at a low risk for cardiovascular disease because they kept their LDL and ApoB down in spite of having severe type 2 diabetes?
Go on. I can't imagine because it's Twitter, so you can get all kinds of stuff.
True, but no one has an answer to that because
Right.
getting your LDL down when you're severely diabetic, there are studies that suggest that's going to give you a reduction in risk, but you're still super high risk. You're still super high risk. Now, what's an interesting question are these lean mass hyperresponders. Lean mass hyperresponders have good metabolism, which is typically indicated by having high HDL cholesterol, low triglycerides. That usually means that the metabolism is successful at pulling the fuel out and putting it back in. And in this case, they're powered like you and I are powered more by fat than we are by glucose. That's our fuel is predominantly triglycerides getting passed through in the same thing that ride shares with cholesterol. So when our cholesterol is really high, when we're adapted to fat, it makes more sense, right? Okay, so if we have high LDL and high ApoB, but we have a good metabolism, like our metabolic markers look good, then what? Are we at a high risk for cardiovascular disease? And our present study, the one that we're focusing on right now, suggests that so far, it's very encouraging that there does not seem to be an increased risk relative to people who have average levels of LDL and also are metabolically healthy.
And I want to remind the audience, this study Dave is talking about was not an epidemiological study. It was a double-blind study where Dave did not even know the outcomes. We talked about this on a previous show. Dave, can you go into that a little bit? Because not everybody hears every show.
Yeah. And to be fair, it would be technically considered observational, but it's prospective. Prospective means you're determining the criteria in advance and then they're being followed. So here's what we did. We recruited 100 lean mass hyperresponders and near lean mass hyperresponders. This is the criteria you're going to care about the most. The LDL to be in the study needed to be 190 or higher. And it needed to have increased at least 50% since you had started a ketogenic diet. And you had to prove that to us with your prior blood work. The HDL needed to be 60 or higher, and triglycerides needed to be 80 or lower. And then outside of that, you need to not have any other common cardiovascular risk
So these
factors.
people are, by definition, in I'm going to say pretty damn good metabolic health, according to
Probably.
the third grade explanation you gave me 5 minutes ago.
Right. They probably have good metabolic health because their HDL and the triglycerides tend to suggest that they have good fuel management, right? Now, what we're doing is we're flying them over to UCLA and this research center called Lundquist. And the study is led by Dr. Matthew Budoff, who's our principal investigator. And they all are getting what's known as a CT angiography. That's a scan of their heart. and they get it at day 0. And then they come back about a year later at day 365-ish and get a second scan with this CT angiography. And these CT scans,
Is that done with a contrast, Dave, or is that just done a CAC style?
that's with the contrast.
Okay, good.
And for those who are curious, you may have heard of a CAC, that's coronary artery calcification scan.
Mhm.
It does pick up both calcified and non-calcified plaque. So it's both kinds of plaque. And we're interested in the non-calcified plaque the most. That's the major endpoint of the study. So with all 100 participants getting 2 scans, we have a baseline set of 100 scans and another baseline set of 100 scans a year later with each participant. We can then compare the 2 scans. And given their enormous exposure of LDL, conventional medicine would predict that they would have a rapid increase in plaque, because that's what we see in those, for example, who have a genetic disease of high LDL, like homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. I know it's a mouthful, but basically it's people born with this disease that convinced the world 50 years ago that, oh, this is the best example of very high LDL straight up causing cardiovascular disease, symptomatic cardiovascular disease in little children, like right away. Well, in our study, we have some folks who have not just high LDL, but I mean extremely LDL. We're talking like 400, 500 LDL.
Not total, folks. LDL.
LDL, correct.
Okay.
So in getting these 2 scans, this longitudinal data, which is to say the data that combines both of them, that's not yet been released. But you and I have already chatted before about the baseline scans, which we were able to take that data of the baseline scans and match it against another control group from another study called Miami Heart.
Mhm.
And that match analysis, there was 80 in our group that was within the age range of Miami Heart. And then the statistician was able to pull from Miami Heart a matching control group. That's what's called a matched control of another 80 from Miami Heart that had average levels of LDL. And that's why I'm able to say what I'm saying now, which is these initial data, when doing the match control, show that there was no statistically significant difference in the plaque levels between both of these groups at a population level. In fact, our group in our study trended toward better, actually trended towards less plaque compared to Miami Heart. But with emphasis, there's no statistically significant difference. So technically, we wouldn't say they're doing better, just that they were trending toward better. But that's super relevant data because our cohort had been at these levels of LDL for an average of 4.7 years. That baseline data, their average time overall was 4.7 years, and the average age of our cohort was 55 years old. So by then, most people are laying down plaque, at least soft plaque in their arteries.
Yeah.
So this was really powerful data.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke last, you were actually giddy over that Miami study and what you guys were able to see. I want to switch gears a little bit. We're going to take a quick break here, but I want to switch gears and talk about the documentary because, as you know, I'm an old veteran of documentaries now,
I know.
whether I want to be or not. Dave, I got to tell you, someone have told me, even in my 40s, my early 40s, one day you're going to write a book and it's going to become wildly popular. And then from that book, you're going to have something called a podcast. You won't know what that is right now, but you're going to have a podcast. And somehow that's going to be wildly popular too. And that's going to lead to 4 documentaries. I would have said, get the hell. I'm a trainer. Get out of here. I'm not doing any of that stuff, but here we are. We'll get into that right after I tell you guys about Villa Capelli olive oil. Now, listen, if you're a lean mass hyperresponder, I think there's a study going on right now by citizen scientists everywhere that says that olive oil has got to be good for your health. And if they're not, I'm telling you, it's good for your health. People always say to me in the consults, because when you always hear me say the consults, it's because it's the only people I talk to during the day. I know you guys think I have this great life. I don't. I talk to people during the consults and that's it. And sometimes Dave Feldman will call me and ask a question or two, and that's it. Here's the deal. People go, what supplements do you take? I always tell them, look, I don't miss a day of magnesium or a multicap. I never miss a day of taking B12, vitamin E, tocotrienol vitamin E. Take it every day. I take MK7, which is methaquinone 7 on top of everything. I have MK4 and MK7 at my and Vinnie Tortorich's vitamins and the Pure Vitamin Club. We have MK4 and MK. I take more MK7. When people ask me what I take, I tell them exactly what I take. And then I'll finish it off by saying, and if I don't put olive oil on my food, and I'm not talking about the stuff you might cook with, like Serena might put it into this or that, I will have raw uncooked olive oil at least an ounce a day. So in the summer, Serena might force me to eat a salad or two here and there. There'll be olive oil on that, right? If I do some roasted, I like the roasted, what do you call it? Broccoli, this sort of thing. I'll pour some olive oil on that, hit it with some salt. Boom. It's delicious. But if I'm not having olive oil any other way, I pour it into a shot glass and I down it 1 ounce at least every day. That's how important this stuff is to your health. I don't care what Dave Feldman has to say about it. Now, listen, in this country, you could cut olive oil up to 40% and still call it 100% pure olive oil. I don't know how they get away with that. I'm hoping RFK or JFK the third or some FK comes out and figures out that we need to make it either pure olive oil or you can't sell it at all. But before you do that, Villa Capelli has 100% pure olive oil, right? Go get Villa Capelli olive oil right now. Put in promo code Vinnie, VINNIE, no wimpy Y, and you'll get 10% off. If you spend more than $125 after the discount, you'll also get free shipping. So I suggest you get a free 3-liter 10, buy a couple of other things, get you built to about $140 minus 10%. That brings you down to about $126. But boom, free shipping, 10% off. You save 2 ways. I'm just telling you that's the way I would do it. Villa Capelli. I drink it here every day. You should drink it wherever you are. Villa Capelli. Dave, before we get into your movie, how do you feel about olive oil? And if you don't like olive oil, don't say anything because I'll just cut it. No, I'm kidding.
No,
Where are you in olive oil?
Yeah, I myself, I like olive oil. If I'm going to have a salad, for example, I'm inclined to, if I can, I'll do olive oil. I always consider that probably the healthiest choice of the things I could drizzle it with.
Yeah.
But what you said actually is one of those things that hits me to the core. As you know, engineers, we tend to be a bit literal, maybe to a fault for many people, but we don't think it's to a fault because we're just saying it's accuracy. So things like what you just said, it still gets me to the core. When you make a claim of 100%, of course I'm going to take that literally.
Right.
You just stated it. It shouldn't be legal to just make a plain statement that's clearly false. I don't like that at all.
And they're allowed to do that, right? And they do it with other oils, other, seed oil, not seed oils, but, avocado oil. Same thing. You could cut it. I think that's also 40%. You could just cut it and just call it, just avocado. You do not have to mention on the front what's in it, right? They will allow you because basically the lie on the front is, well, the olive oil that's in here is olive oil. That's a 100% true statement, but it's not. You see, it's a play on words, right?
Yeah.
And we show that in a couple of my documentaries. It's like, look, this is why they could put this on the front, right? Like organic is another one of those throw phrases where it's like people think, oh, I'm going to spend more. It's organic. It's got to be better for me. I did a deep dive on organic because, Dave, I don't know if you noticed, I wrote a second book that I've never released. And I did a deep dive on what the government calls organic, right? So let's say you have an organic farm and you're growing, I don't know, tomatoes on your farm. And you're not going to use the regular stuff from Monsanto or anything. You're going to use this other stuff to keep bugs off of your tomatoes and keep, the vines, from other stuff growing in there and constricting your vines and everything else. So you try everything. You throw the kitchen sink at it. Now you're putting a chemical in there that's not a chemical, but it's a natural thing that's going to kill a bug and kill other grass and everything else. Yet for whatever reason, it doesn't kill tomatoes. But the law allows that you have to try this several times. If it doesn't work, you can still go in at the end and use the Monsanto-y stuff, kill what you need to kill, and still call it organic because you tried.
Okay.
So now you got two different chemicals. You have a natural chemical that will kill you and the Monsanto. I'm saying Monsanto, but whoever's making the Agent Orange type chemical. And you can still put your organic sticker on it because you gave it the old college try. I'm giving you an roundabout, and I know you think I'm bullshitting you, but I can show you these studies. You will freak out.
I believe it. I believe it only because of the amount of sausage making I've seen since coming into this space.
Yeah.
I'm unfortunately, like so many, coming from the outside where I just took a lot of these things at face value. And now being on the inside in the way that you are, I feel kind of sad, frankly, that we're in the place we're at right now.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I had a radio show in 1989 in New Orleans on WSMB, and I had the DAT tapes for you don't know what a DAT tape is, right?
Actually, I do.
It's
Yeah.
digital. It's a little tiny digital tape, and you're able to store a lot onto these digital tapes. I don't know whatever happened, and SMB has been gone and all that kind of stuff. And I was in 1989. I was talking about nutrition facts and how the government allows you to lie, and you have this percentage that you can lie and get away with, and that's how they do it. I was talking about that stuff almost 40 years ago on the air. And you want to talk about a guy that was considered tin hat wearing back in the day, right? Can you imagine 1989?
Yeah.
Right? That was only 4 years after the great movie Vision Quest came out, right?
Yeah.
That was probably before Rocky IV came out.
That was the year of Batman. I remember Batman got released on that year.
Oh, you nerds with your Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just
But-
talked about Linda Ferrantino in Vision Quest, and you're going to go with Batman? Okay. That's where we are.
Well, yeah.
I was yelling about the facts and the food label and explaining this in 1989. So when people go, how did you come on to this stuff? How long have you been knowing about this stuff? Pretty much my entire life, right? I wasn't even 30 years old. I was 28 years old. I'm doing a quick math. 28 years old at the time, yelling about that on the radio. I'm now 62 years old, and not one view changed. And that's what people say about this podcast. I've now done over 2,600 shows.
Wow.
And believe it or not, I've had people tell me, Vin, I went back after I started listening to you. I went back and started listening to your first shows. And the reason we know you're not lying is because your view is straight through, right? Straight through. Doesn't change. Jillian Michaels can't say that. Not at all. Jillian Michaels is now talking my game. 5 years ago, she was saying, oh, you eat a lot of meat, you're going to die. You got to eat vegetables. I can go find tape of her saying that not even 5 years ago, right? You know you're on the right track when you're saying something right around the time Vision Quest came out, same year Batman or whatever came out, and you're still saying it in 2025 now? That's a lot of years. What is that, 37 years, 36, or something like that? If I'm doing the math right?
I mean, whatever. We can round it to 4 decades. Like it's a long time.
It's a long time. Now, Dave, when you were an engineer, what kind of engineer were you?
Software engineer, built
Same word.
platforms.
All right.
Yeah.
If someone would have said to you 10 years ago, hey, Mr. Software Guy, hey, Mr. Guy in your basement that likes to play games at night on your computer, one day you're going to be doing a movie and it's going to be called The Cholesterol Code. It's going to be a documentary and it's going to be a big deal. Would you have believed that?
Not for a single second. I would say that there's a 0.0% chance what you're saying is true. I
I mean,
wouldn't have
if
believed
someone was said to you in 2015, one day you're going to meet an old ex-jock named Vinnie, and you guys are going to see eye to eye on shit, you would have said, get the hell out of here.
it.
There's
That's
no
more
way.
believable.
Is that more believable than the movie?
More, yeah, than the cholesterol research slash movie slash that seemed completely outlandish. Still seems completely Vinny. I still wake up. I still wake up many mornings where I'm like, what's how? How is this still happening? I
I,
don't.
I do the same thing. I was just a trainer. Dave, when I came to the space, right? When I wrote Fitness Confidential, the people at WME, the biggest entertainment firm in the world, they got a hold of my book, right? And WME said, that's William Morris Endeavor, by the way, folks. Everyone's heard of William Morris, right? They put me with an agent and they were like, this book is going to be huge. We love this book. But we went on the internet and we Googled your name and you do not exist on Google. And I said, isn't that great? And they were like, no, idiot. You need to be on Google. And I said, no, I don't want anybody to know who I am. I don't want, I had no Facebook, no nothing. Right. They were like, well, why don't you want people to know who you are? I said, well, you guys know who my clients are. There are a lot of your clients. And they said, yeah. I said, okay. You guys also know that, now I'm going to mention someone who's not a client, just to be clear. I say, when a Britney Spears goes crazy, she chops all of her hair off and she does crazy, nutty things. The story always says sources close to. You ever wonder who those sources are? They're in-home chefs, trainers, masseuses, and the people who come in to do the fingers, the manicures, pedicures, the people that come in and leave. That's who the sources are. I've gone out of my way because of the size of my clientele to not want to be on whatever this Google thing is. The most I had was an email address. That was it. And I didn't even like getting emails. So when they said, if you want this book to sell, you need to somehow go on the internet and make yourself known to the world, or we don't have a book deal. That's where I was back in 2010, right? So I can imagine how you felt going, hey, I'm going to do a documentary. But I mean, you have a book too, right?
Working on one. It's not out.
So it's not out yet. I knew you were
No.
working on it. I never know who's out and who's not out. So you come into this space. How does a movie, how did someone go, hey, man, Vinny did a movie and that girl over in the middle of the country did a movie? Sustainable Dish did a movie. You need to do a movie. How does that work?
Yeah, it was. So it's a combination. What happened first was in 2019, I announced the beginning of the Citizen Science Foundation that we're raising money for this study. But I also at that same time announced that we were going to literally circle the globe and do interviews around the world. And we're going to compile them into a documentary. But this was without hardly much of a budget. It was Sharon, who is the missus, working the points and miles to basically come up with a schedule that was very ambitious. We were scheduled to go to 17 different countries and 28 cities around the world. And this was in 2019. Our first stop was Beijing, January 6th, 2020. Let that sink in for a moment. So we get there.
And you weren't sure if you could come home, pretty much?
Well, we're starting the interviews. I've got interviews booked. We ended up doing a total of 36 interviews.
Wow.
As you well know, 36 interviews is a lot.
Yeah.
And we had a camera kit that actually had 3 different iPhone 11s. That was the new iPhone at the time, but it was good enough to do actual 4K video in log. And it was a pretty sophisticated setup that we had, and we were able to do this all. But yes, 2020, in case anybody didn't yet connect the dots, January 2020 was when the pandemic is starting to ramp up. But at the time, we're all like,
starting to hear about it. Like nobody.
yeah,
For me, I was like, oh, we're going to have another bird flu. Okay.
right.
No big
That's what I
deal.
was thinking.
Right.
SARS 1, SARS. And I was like, ugh, why are people making a big deal out of this? So we're literally in China doing these interviews, and I'm keeping an eye on my phone, and I'm hearing more and more Wuhan stuff. And I'm like, this is a huge overreaction. And as the time progresses, we start going, oh, this actually is a good time to get out of here.
Yeah.
And it worked out scheduling wise, because we bounced to we bounced to Hong Kong and a few other places before we then ended up in Australia. And in Australia, we went to Melbourne, Sydney, and we were getting on to a boat to head towards New Zealand. And that was the first time people were taking certain passengers aside, would-be passengers, and saying, have you been to China in the last 2 weeks? And we were like, oh, yeah. Literally 14 days ago, though. And that's when things started getting serious. Okay. So I give you that backdrop because we did get a lot of great footage internationally, but the pandemic interrupted our whole filming process because we got the round the world trips interviews, but we were supposed to get a whole bunch of national ones. That was supposed to be January, February, but March, April was supposed to be California, Texas, New York, and we had a whole bunch scheduled for Low Carb Denver of that year. All of them got canceled. Pandemic blew up everything. But we had all this footage.
Dave, you and I, we were in Houston, and I remember 2 things about you in Houston. Was that 2018 or 2019 when you went up on stage and your slideshow didn't work? Was that?
Yeah.
That, you see, I remember stupid things, and I turned to someone. I was sitting up in the booth, and I turned to someone. I said, "That's why I don't do a slideshow, because I would walk up there, and that would be me, right?
Yeah.
The slide's not coming on. Now Dave's up there with his dick in his hand. But it worked out. And then you told me, I think right after that, you said, yeah, my wife and I are taking off around the world. And I was like, how's he going to make a living? So I'm asking now, because I was asking then, it's up to myself, not to you. Okay, you guys are using miles and everything else to circumvent the globe. How do you make a living? Is someone supporting you? Are you getting money from anyone to do this, or what's happening?
No, at that time, I still had a nest egg. That was kind of my sabbatical fund, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So the last business that I had, I sold. I was with a partner. We came out of it pretty well, not, ridiculously wealthy by any means, but I had enough to where I could do this 2-year sabbatical, and I was making the sabbatical stretch, and it was funding both of, all of these tests and experiments I was doing, but it also helped to kind of just cover the bills for that period of time.
Okay.
And went pretty far on that nest egg. So that was part 1 of this 2-part story. Part 2 was we got interrupted. The footage is just sitting there. We had all of this interview footage, but couldn't do anything with it. And then at the beginning of 2021, right as I'm about to get the very first baseline data from the study, serendipitously, through Brett Scher, I believe, we connected with Jen Eisenhart, who is a documentarian, amazing. She did Fat Fiction, which I think got released near the time your first documentary
came out right near each other.
Yeah, but also around the pandemic, which just
also, by the way, folks, go see Fat Fiction.
Yeah, it's great. It's really a great film. And and yes, Metabolic Mind, via Jan Bazuki, was interested in helping out to support the film, production wise. And between the three of us, we determined, oh yeah, you know what? We should really capture, when I'm getting this baseline data, that literally might be the very first thing we film before we fully determine what this film is going to be. And that was the happy coincidence, was that sure enough, the cameras were there. It's literally the very first things that were getting filmed was me meeting Dr. Budoff and seeing in real time me getting those initial baseline data. And when I got it, I mean, you literally watch me reacting as it happens.
Yeah.
I did share what my reaction was with Low Carb Denver, I want to say 8 days later. But the actual film of it, you'll get to see the clip. You'll actually get to see in the documentary. And then for the next 2 years, we actually did a whole bunch of like really high end. I told you the first phase was Sharon and I kind of circling the globe and using our DIY package, which was great. We got a lot of good footage, and a lot of it makes it into this current film. But the new team under Jen Eisenhart, that's like the real business. That's with the high-powered cameras and all the lighting setups and all. I mean, they're top notch. I'm so excited for you to see this film, Vinny, because
I can't wait to see it.
it's amazing. It's amazing as documentaries go. There's just really good quality filming. The editing is incredible, but the sound mixdown is really impressive too. Just Jen's team and her directing is just top notch.
Well, if it's anything, I mean, Fat Fiction was done really well. So if it's anything like that, then you're in good company, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm happy and proud of what you guys have done so far, and I can't wait to see it. Folks, we tried to figure out how to get me to see it, but I don't know, some kind of glitch or whatever. Dave couldn't figure out what to do. And I know you had, didn't you guys have a thing? I think Nina went and a few other people went to go watch a premiere of it.
Yeah, in fact, that's why I'm kind of glad you brought up Nina, because what happened was we had an event. This was, gosh, 10 days ago. It's crazy. It feels like a million years ago now.
Yeah.
But we just had a huge event, and it's not an actual premiere, because the premiere will be on whatever major streaming service we're on. But it was a special showing. And as special showings go, it was very dressy. People came dressed up. We packed a theater, and it was a lot of folks who've supported the research for a long time. And it was at the very beginning of our conference, COSI. And it was great to actually see and be with an audience as they got to watch it for the first time. And at the end, right after it had happened, we were interviewed by Nina Teicholz. She interviewed myself, Jen Eisenhart, and Brett Scher, who plays a very prominent part in the film, and got to answer some great questions, get to talk about, what it took to put it together. And of course, a lot of questions were based on what's within the film.
Is Nina in the movie at all?
She isn't. No.
Because I was about to say, Brett was in Fata Documentary, and you were in Fata Documentary. And I think both of you have small parts in Fata Documentary too. So, folks, if you think Dave and I met each other 5 minutes ago, no.
Nope.
This now movie star was in my movie, and did a great job, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. It was very cathartic, because it was the first time I was being filmed for my cholesterol, everything involved in what I've learned on this journey. So you could say my movie career started with Vinnie Tortorich.
You could. Dave, I think everybody was shocked when they saw what we did in that. We haven't talked about it in years. For all the new people, I went in and we took 2 hotel rooms side by side. We literally made a sound stage. We completely emptied the bedroom. Because I don't know if most people know this, but beds are bolted to the walls in bedrooms, right? We went in there like the A-team with drills, like zzz, 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 I went in there with a team of people. We emptied the bedroom without the hotel figuring it out. We moved everything out without, no one in the hotel was any of the wiser. We moved the complete soundstage into with the big giant cameras and everything. I probably have pictures of you, Dave, somewhere on my phone. While I'm telling the story, I'll see if I can find a picture and hold it up to the screen. But we literally built a soundstage in the, like, just right in the middle of a room. And then we had the video village, part of that was in the bathroom, and the sound village was in the next room. We ran cables over the balcony on the outside. If anyone had ever looked up, they would have seen the sound stage. They was like, wait, why are these cables going from one thing to the other? They would have figured it out by that. It was really kind of crazy what we were able to pull off there.
It was. I remember walking in that room and it felt like I left the hotel. It felt like I walked into some lot, some giant soundstage, and it wasn't a massive room either. It's not like you got the presidential suite and then changed it up so that you had all the room in the world. But yet, looking at those shots, it looked like it was a professional set. It
was a professional Hollywood crew. I brought a whole crew in there. And I remember, I think one of the first people that came in for their interview was Gary Taubes. And Gary, he knows me from the hotel and everything else. Let's see if I can find Dave here. I just found these photos. Come on, I got to find Dave here, folks.
While you're looking,
here, that's Dave.
Yeah, there it is.
A picture of Dave up on. Let's see if we can find another. There's Dave. There's our boy. Yeah, yep. We literally. Gary Taubes walked in and he went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" I was like, "What's wrong?" He goes, "I thought I was coming in here and you would be filming me on like an iPhone."
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone thought. And here's another picture of me and Dave. I'm in my I even wore director style clothes, right? Like a khaki shirt and the whole thing. I was playing the part. I didn't even know what I was doing.
Oh no, you were definitely direct. You said, "Dave, now I want you to make love to the camera." I want you to.
Dave, your eyes are beautiful. The world needs to see that beauty. Yeah, right. I'm like doing all the so
now.
Go on.
I do want to interject one thing that is serendipitous. We do have Gary Taubes also in our film.
Yeah, you gotta have Gary Taubes. I mean, it's not a documentary about low carb unless you have Gary Taubes in it.
It was serendipitous because he hadn't actually committed to our film. And of all places, this was in London. And what happened was one of the other folks that we were going to be interviewing wasn't able to make it. He had a travel hiccup. So we're like, you know how it is. We had already paid for the crew. We had already paid for everything. And so I approached him at the dinner the night before. And I said, "Gary, by chance, would you happen to have tomorrow morning available? Could we talk you into coming and interviewing?" And as it happened, not only was he able to sit down and interview, but it wasn't on general low carb stuff. We had a challenge in that we wanted to give some backdrop to another person we were able to interview, which was Dr. Bernstein.
Oh, wow.
We actually got, how hard it is to get an interview with Dr. Bernstein.
Almost impossible.
It truly almost impossible, but we had some leverage through friends and so forth. But Gary Taubes had just gotten done giving a talk where he discussed diabetes at length, given his new book.
Yeah.
And had a very detailed history of Dr. Bernstein. And of course, Dr. Bernstein's an engineer by training, but ultimately became a doctor. So He was of special relevance to us. We really wanted to be sure that not only we had Dr. Bernstein in for his own interviews, but anybody who we could talk to who could give a detailed history. And Gary Taubes killed it. Our interview with him, it was exactly what we needed for the edit. And that's why it all ties together beautifully. Man, again, we're gonna have you see this film soon. I
I,
guarantee you.
I
We're
I
gonna pull
can't
this
wait to
off.
see it because Gary Taubes is a soundbite machine.
He
That's
is.
the only way you could put it. He's a soundbite machine. And, when I called him, he was the first phone call. I'll never forget. I was on a 101 driving towards a client, and I just picked up the phone and I called Gary and I said, Gary, we're doing this documentary. And he goes, who else is in it? I said, so far, no one. I'm calling you first. And he goes, who else do you want to get? I said, I'm thinking Nina, thinking Brett Shear, Eric Westman, just, the people from the show that I really like talking to. And he said, here's my problem. How do I know you're going to do a good job with it? You're not you've never made a film. And I said, Gary, have I ever steered you wrong? You've been on my show more than anyone else. And he says, you know what? I'll do it. Please don't make me look like a fool. I said, do not worry. I promise that you're going to look good or I'm not doing the movie. And then once I had Gary signed on, then I called Nina and said, hey, I got Gary.
Right.
And, you know, all of them, Dr. Drew, Jim Abrams, who just passed away, right? Everybody I called, it was like, look, I have Eric Westman. Dave, you want to be in my movie? It's like I would use the latest big deal that I got to get the next person on. And everybody was like shocked at what we had in that hotel room. Like nobody could believe it. It kind of took over that convention. And I think the people that ran the convention didn't like me very much because everybody was talking about what was going up in, on the ninth floor and not talking about what was going on down at the convention, which was weird, right? Don't hate me for that. you know, everybody's just strange in that way. So let's get back to the movie just a little bit. Right now, if people want to know more about it, where do they go?
Go to cholesterolcodemovie.com, and there's just right there's a sign up. You throw in your email and they're going to give you the heads up, and I'm very adamant that it doesn't end up on any kind of spam list or anything along those lines. There's a really top-notch PR team that's in charge of it. And why this is relevant is that we're going to be having some satellite showings before the premiere, similar to the one we just talked about, but it'll be more into the summer. But you want to, if it's going to be anything like the last event, you want to be sure that you're on that email list because they may sell out again. That's what happened to ours. It sold out well ahead of time. We maxed out capacity. So it's get on there early and keep an eye on any updates that come that way.
The movie will not be out for a while, but you want to get on the cholesterolcodemovie.com. Go check it out. I will probably have Dave on at least 2 more times by the time the movie comes out because I'm going to keep pushing this. This movie needs to be needs to be seen. So before it comes out, Dave, you're going to be on a couple more times. And I'll probably fly out to see you and be on your show. We're going to play a lot since you're not in Hong Kong anymore. But
yeah.
Congratulations. When you told me this in Houston that day, I was like, this guy's doing what? You're going around the world. I think I might have even said, why don't you just go around the United States? It's a big enough area. And he was like, no, I'm going around the world. I'm finding out the truth. And do you feel like you got that out of this movie? Did you get to any kind of truth?
Yeah. I mean, literally for the last 2 years, I was getting filmed. And what's exciting is that we got to incorporate a lot of those round the world interviews as the pandemic was ramping up, alongside the things that just happened in the last 2 years with the study I was chatting about being the major through line. So you're watching in real time as I'm learning the things I'm learning. In fact, there are major findings in the film that are not yet published. And
Really?
yeah. And it'll probably be published by the time it's fully released, But it could be that we have some more satellite showings that you may actually find out some of the data that's in that study even before it gets fully released.
Dave, I keep wanting to let you go, but I just keep coming up with good questions for you. The team that you have that's helped you make this movie, they've made other great movies like Fat Fiction, right?
Right.
So how do they feel about this one behind
No,
it? Do
we all love it.
yeah.
We could tell as it was coming together. Bill Crum is the editor, and he was putting it together. And there was so much footage that we shot that was great footage. And when I say we shot, I really mean Jen and her team and so forth. But on top of that, there were careful narrative beats that we were mindful to have to stitch it together. But I'm telling you, this film has a heart to it. The heart is in these personal stories that we cover. And something that I think is of special relevance is that we focused a lot on people who are on a ketogenic diet for reasons other than weight loss. It's a lot of lean mass hyperresponders, and basically everybody who's being filmed who are discussing their story, they have some kind of condition that they're treating with a
Yeah.
ketogenic diet, but who face the same thing that I faced, which is their cholesterol goes through the roof. So many of them are attached to what the study is going to tell us, to find out what the data is. But it also has science. It also has science in this film. It doesn't clobber you over the head. It doesn't feel like a lecture. It's very glossy graphics. I think you're going to love that part of it. And it's kind of spread out. It's like in small snippets here and there. Teaches you a little bit about what cholesterol is. Teaches you a little bit about what the lipid energy model is. Teaches you a little bit about how insulin compares to lipids, like the comparison of risk and metabolic health. Teaches you a little bit about that as well. And so it feels like it's got a good heart and a good mind alongside this real-time story that you're watching, including some controversies that had never been seen before and get illuminated when you watch it.
Good. Look, I love that these type of movies are coming out because back when the vegans were the only ones doing the documentaries, they would just make up lies, right? We see that a lot in politics nowadays. Hey, let's create a lie because we're going for the greater good or whatever. So we got to get this guy elected or that guy elected or whatever, right? And people used to say to me, when you do a documentary, you have to do what the vegans did. You have to tell the lie in the other direction. It's like, how about we just tell the truth and just leave it
Right.
at that? Right. So there's a lot of, it's good to tell the truth, right? Because you never have to backtrack or do anything else. Do you see a sequel coming out of this or something coming behind this?
We've already talked about it a lot. There's that possibility. But to address the point you brought up, which is super important to me, we, in the times where we mention a study, we have the PMID right there on the screen
Right.
as we're saying it. We have we've had a lot of review internally against the things being said. Yes, some things are kind of simplified for lay people, but we're very careful with our language. And I'm very proud of the fact that something you brought up, whether whoever the filmmaker is, documentaries often can fall into a state of just having a single message, right? And I'm very proud of this film and that I feel as though we don't make broad, overly categorical claims. And I think we're very pro science. And I think that really comes through in the way it gets discussed. But at the same time, highlights the value these people have, or literally showing in their interviews, they've experienced themselves, along with matching science, just because there's such a whole new frontier of metabolic health, especially with mental illness and the ketogenic diet, that is worth highlighting. Again, this isn't to say keto is the panacea, which I literally say in the film, right? It's not for everyone. But it's, as you know, it does have a headwind.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pushback to even considering it for treatment, which to me is baffling. Like, why not just have it as one of the available options? I'm glad you mentioned who is it that you said had just now passed? Abrams.
Jim
I'm
Abrams.
glad,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Abrams, and it's one of my favorite things of the film that I appeared in, of Fatted documentary, is how you opened with him, and that powerful emotion that he conveys, it really comes through the screen. Because again, he was facing the same thing. Nobody, and he was somebody of enormous means.
Yeah.
Nobody was bringing to him what actually was the discovery of keto. The discovery of the diet was 100 years old,
Yeah.
right? It was 100 years old, and he of all people should have known about it first thing, right? From the
Yeah,
best of the
he
doctors.
had the best doctors. And as a matter of
Yeah.
fact, that movie, he got his friend Meryl Streep to be in it. And folks, anyone can go watch this for free on YouTube. And Jim wants it to be free. He wants people to be able. It's called First Do No Harm, where they show another couple. It's a real life story of a couple somewhere in the Midwest who they were trying to do the same thing to their kid that they wanted to do to Jim Abrams' kid. Basically, give an infant a lobotomy. I'm not, the truth is straight. And you go, wait, what year is this? This was only about 25 years ago, right?
That's true, actually. Yeah, because it was the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah, like 2001, something like that.
Yeah. It wasn't that long ago. And they were like, well, this kid's having 200 seizures or something a day, 100 seizures a day. We're going to just go in and just, on an infant, go cut out a piece of his brain, do a lobotomy and see if it'll slow it down a bit. And Jim walked into it. Look, I'm divine intervention, right? Dave and I talk science, so we don't talk a lot about divine intervention. But Jim walked into a library. He's trying to find any research he could find before they literally crack his kid's head open and take a piece of his brain out. And he opens up this text, and it opens up to the page on ketogenic diets and seizures. And he ran into the doctor and he goes, what about this? And he goes, yeah, they did that 100 years ago. We don't do it now, but does it work? Yeah, but your kid will have cholesterol problems. They went back to that. Right?
Yeah.
You want to give my kid a lobotomy. Did anyone not see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Right? That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think I may have even told you the story before, but I directly relate to that because after I wrote that article where I coined the term lean mass hyperresponder, and it got a massive response, and I had no idea I was going to get a massive response. I had no idea how many people were out there that fit this phenotype.
Right.
In the last two paragraphs, you can look at it right now, the original article, the last two paragraphs, I said, if I follow this to its logical conclusion, this whole energy model that I'd been working on, it makes sense this would probably apply to kids, that kids would more likely be leaner. They'd have better metabolism than adults in general. I could imagine that there would be, but of course, kids don't typically get tested for lipids unless they have some metabolic or unless they have some kind of disease for which a lipid panel would come up. Because of those two paragraphs, a couple reached out to me. The dad, I remember, was a neurosurgeon, I believe. And I remember this distinctly because I was just thinking, well, this was somebody who's already in the medical field. But their daughter, who was 2 years old, she was dealing with seizures and a loss of energy, and her energy went up and her seizures went way down when she went on a ketogenic diet. And the pediatrician said, I appreciate this is doing great, but her cholesterol is unbelievably high now.
Jesus Christ.
So we need for you to bring in a lot more fructose to get these lipid levels down. And they were talking about brain surgery at that time. That was the point at which it got real for me, Vinny, because like between 2015 and 2017, this was more of like a hobby thing that was interesting. That's the point where it got a lot more serious, where I was like, okay, I guess, because they were asking for answers from me. And of course, I don't actually have prospective data. But I think at that point, I was never going to really stop until I myself could get prospective data of some kind. So that's why Citizen Science Foundation came around, and ultimately the study. And ultimately, as I never can say enough, thank you to the whole community thank you to you and so many others who've helped to bring attention to it so that we could raise the money to literally do this thing.
Dave, don't thank me, man. I'm thanking you because we need you and we need more guys like you. And I'm glad you hooked up with the right people to get this movie out. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that everyone's. Do you guys know where it's going to live yet? Did you make a deal yet?
That's in the works right now. That's also part of the PR team and some other people who are. I'm not into the whole distribution scheme. That's all kind of their thing
Well,
to
I
figure
gave
that
them my
out.
2 cents on that when we all talked.
Yeah, yeah.
And I hope they paid attention to that because
Me too. I've repeated your words in meetings since. So
yeah.
if that helps.
So let's hope that they do the right thing. Folks, you can go check out Dave over at cholesterolcodemovie.com. You can also go to, what's your regular website, Dave?
You could, so there's of course the very original cholesterolcode.com site.
Yeah.
But I don't attend to it quite as often as I used to. Probably the place to watch would be the citizensciencefoundation.org, which is a bona fide public charity. That's where the major updates come. But the place I'm most active on is on social media on X. So you could go to Twitter/X, and my username is Real Dave Feldman.
Oh, now you gave me another song for the end of the show. If I could pull this song up. I might do this one versus the other one because we played the other one for I'm going to play this one at the end of the show because I was going to do Thomas Dolby's She Blinded Me with Science, but I used it on Zoe Harcombe the other day, and You're Not a She. So I got a different song for you. Folks, you know what to do. We all go shopping on Amazon. Before we go to Amazon, go to VinnieTortorich.com. Click through the banner. It puts a little coal on the fire, gets my train down the track. We're able to keep the show free for a gazillion years in a row. CholesterolCodeMovie.com. Go help our friend Dave out. Go sign up there. They'll tell you where you'll find the movie when it comes out. And we're going to have Dave on a couple more times before it's out. Dave, don't go away because we have to upload this boop-a-bop. So hang on. So on behalf of Dave Feldman, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living and do it with what? Oh, just ZZ Top.